Many of us use our cell phones every day. We never even think about everything that's in them, but this magical little device has drastic consequences for millions around the world. The idea I'm referring to is conflict minerals. The international community has cracked down on compliance on the 4 major minerals specifically mined in the eastern DRC, those being tungsten, tantalum, tin, and gold. However, a crucial component of many of our electronics that has been overlooked for years has actually been cobalt. Cobalt is predominantly used in lithium-ion batteries and jet engines. Demand for the mineral increases by 5% every year. That number will only get bigger as electric vehicles, which need lithium-ion batteries, become a more prevalent mode of transportation. When we get our phones and computers, they come in nice and shiny packages. But nothing about our electronics is neat and clean, as the minerals that are used in our electronics rely on the exploitation of millions of individuals around the world to fuel our insatiable desire for the newest gadget. So here it is. Unfortunately, the screen cracks. Let's take a closer look at what's going on in the DRC right now. Currently, over 50% of the world's supply of cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are 2 main methods in which cobalt is mined. The first is through authorized mines that are more regulated, and the other is through artisanal mining that are more informal. This second form is where the majority of the problem lies, and it actually became more prevalent after the Second Congo War, where President Laurent Kabila encouraged citizens to mine on their own because the government could no longer support the formal mining industry like it did before the war. Out of this informal industry, inhumane practices and child labor became prevalent, especially in the South. Child labor became commonplace because children had to support families and come up with money to attend school. Many of these children are abused and extorted by guards and only get paid $1 to $2 per day for their 12-hour workday. And unfortunately, the worst thing of all is that the U.S. Department of Labor has known since 2009 about the prevalence of child labor in cobalt mining and has done nothing to stop it. The vast majority of miners don't even have access to basic protective equipment and use primitive methods to mine for cobalt. Health problems such as hard metal lung disease, respiratory illness, bone deformities, muscle deformities, and mermaid syndrome, in which an individual's legs are fused together, are common. A recent study from a local university reported cobalt concentrations in urine were 43 times higher for residents that lived near mining sites, even higher in children. Further, artisanal mines are shoddily dug, and severe injuries and fatalities are common. In one fire alone, 15 people died. So, who's buying this cobalt? Mostly Chinese companies such as Dongfang Mining International Company, owned by various shell companies. The cobalt's then melted down, put into electronics, and distributed across the world. So, how do we solve such a big problem such as this? There are so many actors at fault here, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo's government, mining companies in China, large corporations like Apple and HP, and lack of action from the international community. The first necessary step is to update the Dodd-Frank Act. In an interview with Todd Frankel from the Washington Post, he reports,
these minerals that suddenly were addressed by U.S. legislation, and so naturally people gravitated towards those. But what we found is that the issues with cobalt were there and sort of bubbling beneath the surface, but just had not received the same scrutiny, basically because they were not included in the original Dodd-Frank legislation.
Thus, if cobalt were to be added to the Dodd-Frank legislation in addition to 3TG, that would allow for greater scrutiny and transparency along the supply chain for cobalt as well, which would reduce human rights abuses and child labor practices. Second, the international community ought to adopt OEC due diligence requirements for cobalt, which has 5 main parts. First, risk assessment. Second, monitoring the supply chain. 3, creating a strategy for mitigation of risks. 4th, third-party auditing. And 5th, transparent reports.
They don't want, not only do they not want this because it's not good, but it's also because it's not good for business.
At the end of the day, this solution is the most viable because electronics companies will face the greatest amount of pressure from the consumer demanding cleaner gadgets. More reports about human rights abuses are bad for press. Thus, guidelines and legislations that require companies to clean up their supply chains is the most valuable option because other actors like the Democratic Republic of Congo's government is too corrupt to take action.